Hi boys and girls, welcome back to Aunt Vicky's. I have missed you. Have you missed me? Well, I finally got you another story written, and as always, Aunt Vicky's magical hat box, her magical teapot, and inside a story for all the boys and girls in America and around the world. Let's get started, boys and girls. Here is our poem clue. School bells, golden beauty of autumn time, listen to the school bells chime. Children gathering here and there, enjoying the harvest season fair. Smiling and running to catch the big yellow bus. Please, dear children, be kind and with one another, do not fuss. Play and learn your lessons well, that your good grades do not badly fail. Golden beauty of autumn time, listen to the school bells chime. Now, boys and girls, do you know what the story will be about today? Of course you do. It's going to be about a school adventure. And if you recall, the children that have now come to live on Leafy Farm, well, we're going to do the little story. It's going to be a little bit about them, but also it's something to do with Betsy, the beautiful little milk cow that lives on Leafy Farm as well. Cuddles and Spuddles, Betsy's school adventure. Lily and Harvey had to go to school and were very excited. Mr. and Mrs. Leafy had purchased the school uniforms and shoes. They had also bought other items the children would be needing. The parents and teachers, as well as all the children and principal, had a meeting. Lily and Harvey got to meet their new teacher, Miss Evergreen. They also met all their classmates and Mr. Chadley, the principal. Mr. and Mrs. Leafy were given papers to fill out, and the principal told Lily and Harvey that they would be riding the number 5 school bus. That evening, when the Leafys got back to the farm, Mr. Rivers came over and asked if they thought it would be a good idea to build a school bus shelter for the children. Yes, said Mrs. Leafy, that sounds like a wonderful idea. And Mr. Leafy agreed. Mr. Leafy and Mrs. Leafy wanted to make sure that when Lily and Harvey had to catch the bus on cold, windy, rainy days, that they would not have to stand out in the weather and get sick. Mr. Rivers asked, "Where shall we build one?" "Well," said Mr. Leafy, "down at the end of the farm road by the mailboxes is where they will have to catch the bus." Mrs. Leafy replied and said, "Then that is where we need to build it." Early the next morning, Mr. Rivers went into town and brought back all the things he thought it would take to make the building. Mrs. Leafy asked Mr. Leafy and Mr. Rivers if they could build it and make it match the mailboxes that were built and painted like charming birdhouses. Mr. Leafy thought it would be just fine. So everyone, including Lily and Harvey, helped to make the bus shelter, and they worked all week long on it together. When it was finally finished, Mrs. Leafy took a look at it. She smiled and said she thought it was the prettiest bus shelter she had ever seen. The building had a nice long bench inside to sit on and an umbrella stand and coat rack. It even had a window on each side so the children could look out and see their school bus coming. Mr. Rivers and Mr. Leafy had placed a door on the front of it that swung back and forth. Cuddles and Spuddles enjoyed pushing on the door and watching it as it swung in and out with a squeaking sound. Everyone began laughing as they watched the twin kittens pushing on the door with their tiny little paws. That night, Mrs. Leafy made a long, soft cushion for the bench and pretty checkered curtains for the windows. Mr. Leafy told the children the next morning at breakfast that they could use the bus shelter building as a playhouse too. As Mr. and Mrs. Leafy and the children went to place the soft cushion upon the bench and hang the curtains on the windows, Cuddles and Spuddles chased after them. Lily and Harvey were so delighted, they peeked out the window as Mrs. Leafy pulled back the curtains. All day long the twin children and the twin kittens played in a school bus shelter that was made to look just like the mailboxes that looked just like a birdhouse. That night, Harvey and Lily took their baths, and as they filled their new backpacks with their school supplies, Mrs. Leafy ironed and pressed their school uniforms and hung them neatly on the children's closet doors. The children were going to school the next morning, and everyone was helping to prepare for the special day. Lily and Harvey were snuggling down in their beds and had on their soft pajamas. Mr. Leafy set the alarm clock on the nightstand between them. Cuddles and Spuddles, as usual, curled up with the children to sleep. Mr. and Mrs. Leafy and the children had already knelt and said their bedtime prayers. Lily and Harvey kissed their mama and papa, and then Mrs. Leafy turned out the light. The alarm clock that sat between the children's bed glowed a pretty turquoise green color as it continued to go tick-tock. The children and the kittens drifted off to sleep. Early the next morning, Sir General Red the Rooster began to crow, cock-a-doodle-doo. Then suddenly the clock began to make a loud ringing noise. As the children hurried to get dressed for their very first day of school, Mrs. Leafy prepared breakfast for the cottage family. She had even made the children a very good lunch for their new lunch boxes. After breakfast, Lily and Harvey took their lunch and backpacks and waved goodbye to their parents as they went down the farm road to their bus shelter. Cuddles and Spuddles ran after the children and sat with them until the big yellow school bus came roaring up the road and stopped in front of the building. The bus driver opened the door for Lily and Harvey to get on, and as he did, he said, "Good morning. My name is Mr. Brown." Lily and Harvey said, "Good morning, Mr. Brown," and then they sat down in the seat behind him. As the big yellow school bus door closed, it roared on down the highway, leaving Cuddles and Spuddles far behind. The twin kittens waited for Lily and Harvey all morning long to come back. Cuddles and Spuddles had now become very worried about Lily and Harvey. It was now well after lunch, and the children had not come back yet. Cuddles and Spuddles meowed and wondered, where is school? And meowing, Spuddles said, I don't know where it's at, but I know who does know. Cuddles meowed and replied, I know too. The twin kittens had now become very worried that Lily and Harvey might not ever come back. They just had to find Betsy the milk cow. After all, Betsy knew everything, it seemed, and she would be able to tell the kittens if the children would be coming back to Leafy's farm. Cuddles and Spuddles searched everywhere for Betsy. They looked in the barn, but she wasn't there. They looked down by the old mill pond, and she wasn't there either. So they went all across the fields and meadows of pretty wildflowers, but still they could not find Betsy the milk cow. Poor Cuddles and Spuddles sat down at the edge of the meadow near Leafy's woods, and the twin kittens began meowing and crying. They thought Betsy must have gone away too. Suddenly, they heard a noise in the wooded area behind them. Then they heard something mooing, and as they looked around, there stood Betsy the milk cow. "Now," mooed Betsy, "what is all this meowing and crying about?" "Oh," meowed Cuddles and Spuddles, "we looked everywhere and we couldn't find you." "Well then," mooed Betsy, "I guess it's a good thing that I found you too." Then she mooed again and asked, "What were you looking for me for?" Cuddles and Spuddles began meowing and crying. "Oh, Betsy, Lily and Harvey went away to school, and we don't know if they will ever come back." Betsy mooed. "Well, of course they will come back. After all, they only went to school." Betsy told Cuddles and Spuddles to stop meowing and crying, and that she would tell them all about school and about her adventure when she went there. Cuddles and Spuddles stopped crying and meowing and asked, "Betsy, did you really go to school?" "I certainly did," mooed Betsy. "Did you ride on the big yellow school bus?" asked the kittens. Shaking her head no, Betsy mooed and said, "Of course not. Animals and pets are never allowed to ride on a bus, so you two don't ever even think about doing that," she mooed. It was very true indeed. Betsy had went to school, and it was quite the adventure, and she had not gone on the school bus either. Betsy began to tell the story about the first and only day of school that she had ever experienced, and even though she thought it was a wonderful place for children, Betsy mooed and said school is definitely no place for a milk cow, and for that matter, she didn't think she would ever want to go back there and revisit, and mooed at the very thought of it. It had been one fall autumn day in late September, and the nearby town was holding a fair. Mr. and Mrs. Leafy had borrowed a trailer to carry Betsy in so that they could enter her in the very best milk cow show. Mrs. Leafy also entered a very pretty homemade quilt and some of her jars of honey and fruit jams and jellies. Mr. Leafy hitched the trailer to his truck and opened the trailer gate. As Betsy walked into the trailer, she peeked out of the sideboards at Mr. Leafy as he closed the gate behind her. Then away they went to the fairgrounds. When they got there, they placed Betsy in a stable along beside other milk cows and farm animals. Then Mr. and Mrs. Leafy went to enjoy all the activities. There were all kinds of contests and fun things to ride on, like a Ferris wheel and a musical carousel, as well as what Mr. and Mrs. Leafy had referred to as bumper cars. There was foods of all kinds. Apples were dipped in sweet caramel candy, and delicious corn dogs were served as well, and burgers and fries. There was cotton candy that just melted in your mouth, and large striped lollipops too. It seemed as though people and their farm animals had came from all over for the Harvest Fair Carnival. That day, Betsy won a blue ribbon prize for the sweetest tasting milk of all the cows, and she even came in first place as the prettiest cow as well. Mr. and Mrs. Leafy were very proud of Betsy, and Mr. Leafy accepted a gold cup for Betsy the milk cow and in her honor. Mrs. Leafy had even won her beautiful quilt in the contest, and her jars of jams and jellies came in first place. But that evening, when the Leafys left to go back home, they didn't take Betsy with them. She was left behind in the stable, along with the other cows and farm animals. Betsy watched as the Leafys pulled away in their truck. She began mooing because Betsy thought they had forgotten about her. That night, poor Betsy stayed all night long in the stable, and she hardly slept at all. Early the next morning, a school bus full of children pulled up near her stable. The children got off the bus to look at Betsy, and as well they looked at the other animals in the fair. Then the children ran off in every direction to play and enjoy the rides and the foods. As Betsy watched the children, she began to take a look at the bus they had gotten off on, and to Betsy's surprise, she saw that it was the very same school bus that ran past the Leafy's farm. Now Betsy was probably one of the smartest milk cows in the whole fair. She declared she would watch that bus, and if it left the fair, she was going to follow it. Then she would be sure to get back home to her barn on Leafy Farm. Betsy bumped against the stable's latch until it broke and the gate came open. But nobody at the fair had even noticed what she had done. Sure enough, later that day, the children all got back on the bus, and when Betsy heard the roaring of the bus as it was leaving, she ran out of the stable and chased after it. But still, no one noticed what she was doing. Betsy followed the school bus as it drove slowly around a few blocks and came to stop right in front of the schoolhouse. The children got off the bus and ran into the school. Betsy began to moo. What a fine mess this is, she thought. Well, this isn't the Leafy Farm at all. The school door stood wide open, and so Betsy decided to go up the steps and into the building. She walked down the hallway and began mooing as loud as she could. Poor Betsy was scared near not out of her wits. Oh my, let's see. Teachers and children came running out of their classrooms to see what on earth was going on. Then the principal came out of his office, and oh my, but was he ever so surprised. But I wager to say he wasn't a bit more so surprised than Betsy. After all, that school bus was supposed to have went toward the farm, not the schoolhouse. The principal quickly got the teachers back into their classroom along with the children. When the classroom doors were all safely closed, the principal slowly approached Betsy. He could see Betsy had on a cowbell with writing on it. He gently walked up to her and read what was written on the bell. He patted her kindly and led her down the hallway to his office. The principal called the phone number he had seen on the bell and spoke to someone, and then he said, "Yes, she will be just fine until you get here." When he hung up the phone, he patted Betsy again, then went out of the office, closing the door tightly behind him. Betsy the milk cow didn't know what to do now, so she stood looking out the office window. After what seemed like a very long time, she heard a loud ringing noise, and she could hear the children racing down the hallway. As Betsy looked out the window again, she saw children getting on the buses, and those big yellow school buses drove away with the children on them. Now she had been left behind again, but only this time she wasn't in the stable. She was standing right in the middle of the principal's office. "What a dilemma this is," mooed Betsy. It seemed things had just went from bad to worse. Just as she gave up hope of ever finding her way back home, the door opened. The principal walked in, but when Betsy looked behind him, much to her relief, was Mr. and Mrs. Leafy. Mr. and Mrs. Leafy thanked the principal kindly for taking such good care of Betsy for them. The milk cow mooed as she followed the Leafys back out to the truck, and they put her back into the trailer once more and drove back toward the fair. But she began mooing and mooing because she didn't want to go back to that fair, no matter how good everyone had been to her there. When Mr. Leafy drove near the fairgrounds, Betsy could see there were no people or animals anywhere. In fact, it looked completely empty, and as Mr. Leafy drove past, he never even stopped until he got home to Leafy Farm. As he opened the gate for Betsy to come out of the trailer, she was so happy that she mooed and hurriedly went to lay down in her own stable in the fresh hay in her very own home inside the big barn. Poor Betsy was completely exhausted, but she was overjoyed to finally be back where she belonged. Just as Betsy had finished telling Cuddles and Spuddles about her school adventure, they could hear the big yellow school bus coming to a stop in front of the children's pretty bus shelter. Lily and Harvey were back home, and the twin kittens ran to greet them. That night, Cuddles and Spuddles snuggled up safely to Lily and Harvey, and they knew that even though the children went to school each day, that they would always come back to Leafy Farm. Out in the big barn, Betsy looked around her at all the other farm animals and thought of everyone inside the little farm cottage. She even looked out the barn window at Mr. Rivers and Marty's house across the way, and as she stood looking, old Wiser the owl flew overhead, and with a hoot he called down to Betsy, "Hoo, hoo! Good evening, my friend. It is a very pretty night." "It is very pretty indeed," mooed Betsy. And then Wiser hooted again and said, "Woo, woo, I'm a-gonna go hunting." "Okay," mooed Betsy. "Have a very, very lovely time." Then she watched as old Wiser flew high up into the starry moonlit night sky. and she softly mooed. It's a heavenly home, sweet home here on Leafy's farm. And she mooed once more, a kind, happy nighty-night. Wow, that was some story, boys and girls. Oh, I can only hope that you are truly, truly enjoying your school this year, and that you are being very kind and very good boys and girls. I hope you're studying and learning a lot of things, and maybe you can just let Aunt Vicky know how things are going for you out there. I'm enjoying the autumn here at the Thomas Cottage, and today it's very, very cold, and the winds are really blowing out there. I don't know if you can hear them or not, but it's a very pretty autumn day, and I'm very thankful for this day, as I am for every day. Life is something we do cherish. And boys and girls, I hope that you're safe and that you're happy, and that everything in your world is going well. And once again, from the cottage here on the Tennessee River with Aunt Vicky, I wish you much kindness until the next time. And with all sweetness and love, Aunt Vicky wishes you a sweet, sweet night tonight. Goodbye, boys and girls.